We're ready. Take it away.
Should I begin?
Oh no! I'll prompt you when it's
right,
your moment.
Thing, right.
Vanchakalpaturbhischa, Kripasindhuevaccha, Patitanam Pavanabhya, Vaishnavabhya Namaha, Om Gyantiramandasya, Ganjana Salakaya, Chaksha Militanyana, Tashmai Shigurvenama, Trinada Pisanichina, Tarora Pisahishnana, Amanina Manadena, Kitni Sadari, Tatinu Kampam Susamik Shama, Ujanavatma Kitam Vipakam, Hitvakapupi Vidam, Namaste, Jivata Yamukti Sadaya Bak, Rachavegam, Manashikrovegam, Jivavegam, Udaro, Pashtavegam, Etan Veganyo Vishaheta Dira, Savam Apimam Pritivim Sashishyat. Anyabhlasta Sunyam, Gyan Kamadhyana Vrita, Manukalenya Krishna Ushilanam, Bhakti Uttama, Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hari Hari. Dandavat pranams, Dandavat pranams, Dandavat pranams, my fellow God brothers, God sisters, God mothers, God fathers, uncles, aunties, sisters, brothers, cousins, second cousins, daughters, sons, and nephews and nieces, and everybody who's about to join, because we keep on getting people coming in even half an hour after we started. Very excited about tonight. This was definitely a high-risk choice. We didn't know whether it was going to frighten everybody away or attract everybody, but it's a very, actually, I've never thought I'd be as excited about death as I am tonight. This is an absolutely tremendous topic, and I've got no idea which way this is going to go, because there's so many ways in which you could interpret the subject matter. Before I hand over to our beautiful Jupiterian MC, I want to welcome our wonderful host, our wonderful panelists, Shriman Budara Prabhu, Shriman Madhuvrat Prabhu, Shrimati Shareshwari Didi. Sorry, Maharaj, I should have said you first, but you know I'm a bit lax. Shripad Bhagavat Maharaj, Shripad Bhaktivedanta Bhagavat Maharaj.
You're keeping me humble.
Yeah, by mistake, Maharaj. That's your mercy. Thank you. And we should have, although she may be a few minutes late, Srimati Yashashvani Aditi, who will be joining our panel tonight. Have I missed anyone else? Tarun. I think that's it, isn't it, in terms of our panel? Please pray.
I think, have you mentioned, if you haven't, Shriman Badara Prabhu, if you have, you get a double mention. Yeah. And of course, who I'll be introducing in a second, our guest speaker.
So also please pray for the good recovery, health recovery of one of our panelists who's obviously not able to make it tonight because he had some heart issue, some operation. Shriman Raghunath Prabhu over in America, he's making a very good recovery, so please have him in your thoughts. And before I hand over to our MC Tarun, I just want to let you know that at a date to be announced, not too far away, we are going to have a meditation in action revisited, because we've got about 32 beautiful devotees who have signed up to do meditation in action. It is now happening. Everybody's in their second week of doing it, or in some cases, maybe first week. And we will be coming together for a further talk and sharing experiences at a holistic bhakti program to be announced soon, which is very exciting. That's had an awful lot of interest, and a lot of momentum has been created. So I now hand over to Tarun, who will be taking over the airplane from here. Haribol Tarun, Dandavat Pranams.
Haribol Dandavat. Let's see if the words can get out of my mouth this time. Okay, so before I pass everyone over to Shriman Raghunath Prabhu, I am going to share this brief video of Srila Prabhupada speaking on this topic. Could everyone make sure that their mic is on mute? In fact, I'll just do that. Okay, we're good. Okay.
There's no sound, Terry.
Yeah, I was just about to message you. Sorry. Okay, it's been a while. Let's try again.
Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam.
You, every one of us, we had the trouble at the time of death, at the time of birth and death. We are living entities. We are living soul. Birth and death takes place of this body. The body takes birth and the body is vanquished. Death means sleeping for 7 months. That's all. That is death. The soul is, when this body is unfit for living, the soul gives us this body, and by superior arrangement, the soul is put again into the womb of a particular type of mother, and the soul develops that particular type of body. Up to 7 months, the soul remains unconscious, and when the body is developed, again consciousness comes, and the child wants to come out of the womb, and he moves. Every mother has experienced how the child moves at the age of 7 months within the womb. So it is a great science how the soul, living soul, is in contact with this material body and how he is transmigrating from one body to another. The example is given just like Basangsi Jinnani Jatha Vihaya. We are just like when the garment or satin coat becomes too old, we give it up and we accept another satin coat. Similarly, you, every one of us, we are spirit soul. We are given a type of body and satin coat by the arrangement of material nature. Prakite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarva. That particular body is given to us for our particular type of standard of living. Just like you, European, American, Australian. You have got a particular type and you are given the opportunity, a particular standard of living. Just if some Indian comes to your European, American, Australian cities, just like your Melbourne city, I was just speaking to my students, if any Indian comes, that they will be surprised with this standard of living.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Very well. Thank you, everyone, for coming again. It's a pleasure to have you all. I'm now going to hand over to our dear guest speaker, Sriman Raghunath Prabhu. He asked me to keep his introduction brief. He doesn't want to be overly glorified or praised in the introduction. He was making some funny jokes about how if you do that, then you can only then you never quite live up to the introduction. Sorry, you never quite live up to the introduction. So I'm going to keep it very brief. So Sriman Raghunath Prabhu is living in London, has come from the States, and was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1973, and has been in the Krishna consciousness movement for nearly 50 years. So when you're ready to start speaking, Raghunath, you can unmute yourself. Oh, you are unmuted, and yeah, take it away.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my God, it's a minute. This year, Gananjana Shulakaya. Chak Shura Militam Jana Tasmai Shri Gurvanama. Shri Chaitanya Manobistam Stapitam Jana Bhutale. Swayam Rupagadama Dadati Swapadanti Kam. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhunichananda, Shri Dvaitagadadhar, Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Thanks to everyone for coming and giving me this opportunity to render some service to my Guru Maharaj and to the Vaishnavas. My sole purpose tonight, that's S-O-L-E and S-O-U-L, my sole purpose is to raise a bit of awareness about the unpredictability of death. What I've noticed over the years is that if I have an emotional relationship with someone of some type, you know, a friendship, whatever it might be, and they die suddenly, especially, it's very heartrending, you know, and may be very difficult to recover. But if it's someone that I didn't really know very well and I hear about it, it doesn't affect me as much. I remember when Srila Prabhupada left this mortal world, shortly thereafter, what's his name? Brahmananda Prabhu wrote a book about it. And in the introduction, he said, I don't think any of us will forget where we were and what we were doing when Srila Prabhupada left this world. And I know where I was and I know what I was doing. Some devotees had been designated to go to Vrindavan and be with Srila Prabhupada in his last days. Others were designated to remain in their temples and at their duty stations. So I was designated to remain distributing books. So on the day in question, I was in the airport in Philadelphia distributing Bhagavad Gitas and Bhagavatams, and an Indian family came through the concourse. They had just come off a flight from India, and we sort of started chatting to each other, you know, about India, Bhagavad Gita and all that. And one of the men told me that they had just come from a funeral of one of their relatives over there in India. I forget where. And he said to me, I want to show you something. I said, okay. So he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope with about 25 or 30 color Polaroid photos in it. And each of those photos was of the family standing around the coffin with the dead body in it and posing for pictures. Now, usually when people are asked to pose for a photograph, they'll say, please smile or something like that. They're all standing around the coffin with the dead body in it, crying. That's what the photos were about. As soon as I saw that, I thought to myself, Prabhupada's gone. This is an omen. And sure enough, when I got back to the temple that evening, temple president called us into the prasadam room, and we all sat down, and he said, Srila Prabhupada left us tonight around 7:30 our time. It was like stepping on a mine and having it explode right under you. I can only speak for myself. I was paralyzed. I couldn't think. I couldn't. The question of eating was out of the picture completely. All the Mahaprasad was there. They always save Mahaprasad for the devotees. And nobody touched a morsel. And I think the worst part for me was the day after, during Guru Puja. I'm sure, I know there wasn't a dry eye in the place. And we all felt it. We became fearful. We were anxious about the future. Our father had just left us, our teacher, our guide, our protector, had just left the planet. And we were in a bit of a panic, what to do next. So in more recent years, I've recalled that story in the Bhagavatam about King Puranjana, who was very attached to his wife. So in the next life took birth as a woman, Queen Vaidarbhi, who married a very pious king, Malayadwaj. And at the appropriate time, Queen Vaidarbhi and King Malayadwaj took Vanapras and went to live in the forest. And one day, when Queen Vaidarbhi was massaging her husband's legs, the legs went cold. This coldness traveled up to the top of his head, and he died right there in the forest. And here's poor Queen Vaidarbhi wondering, well, what am I going to do next? At that point, a Brahmin came walking through the forest and approached her. And the Brahmin said, don't you remember me? I was once your very dear friend, but you gave up my association to become an enjoyer of the material world. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, the Brahmin was the Paramatma, the super soul himself, who came to give her protection and direction. Prabhupada said, because she served her husband like a dutiful disciple serves the guru, that was her qualification for getting instructions from the super soul. And then Prabhupada said, if the disciple is sincere, even the guru leaves the planet, the disciple will never, never, never be without direction and protection. From within, the what's called Checha Guru, the guru within, the Paramatma, will give direction. Go here, go there, associate with them, don't associate there. And I can honestly say, my life since Prabhupada left has been like that. Eventually, I went to live in Vrindavan for some years, and I met two very prominent personalities who gave me a lot of hope, One was Prabhupada's godbrother, Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj, whom you may know, and also Srila Gurudev. I think I might have, I don't remember, I think I might have met Gurudev first and Krishnadas Babaji later. Krishnadas was, because he was a Babaji, there were no restrictions as to his behavior in terms of manifesting ecstatic symptoms. And he used to let it fly, just tears coming from the eyes, horripilations on the body. And I kept thinking to myself, what's my qualification for being allowed to associate with such an exalted personality and observe his symptoms of unconditional love for the divine couple? Anyway, like Srila Prabhupada, Krishnadas just won us over. We fell in love with him. And when he got to be about 75, he used to circumambulate Govardhan and Radhakund every day of his life. In fact, one time I was standing on the steps of the Krishna Balaram Mandir chatting to, what was his name? Can't think of his name now. That fellow from Asian devotee became a sannyasi. He was in charge of the, what was it, the Bhaktivedanta Institute? Anybody remember what his name was? I can't remember his name now. But anyway, we were chatting, And suddenly Krishnadas Babaji appeared, and they embraced each other, and we were all talking and joking, and and then eventually Krishnadas, when he got to be about 75, his legs started failing him. He moved out to the Bhajan Kutir of Sanatana Goswami. And one day a friend of mine and I went out to visit him, and we looked through the window. We could see he was on the floor. It looked to be like he was sleeping with a blanket over him. And oh yeah, I just remembered the name, Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj. He's the one name I couldn't remember. Anyway, when we looked through the window and we saw Krishnadas lying on the floor, I just got this feeling. You know how you get a feeling sometimes? And I said to this devotee I was with, he's leaving us. Within a few weeks' time to a month, he'll be gone. Sure enough, about a month later, after Mangalarti, we got news that Krishnadas Babaji had left his body in Nandagram. So about 6 or 7 of us jumped into a taxi and we rushed out there as fast as we could. And we got there just in time to see his servant, Hari Prasad, carrying his guru's body, circumambulating a hole where they were going to intern him. And it was extraordinary. Krishnadas was in a lotus posture as his disciple was carrying him, and his eyes were wide open, but not staring wildly. They were in deep meditation. And I thought to myself, this must be what samadhi looks like. He was actually in samadhi when we saw him that day before they placed him into the hole. Then eventually they placed him in and put big pieces of Ekadasi salt and bead bags and chutters and all that kind of thing. And then afterwards, his servant said to us, my Guru Maharaj was Sakiras. How do you know? He said, well, I had a room next to him, and he used to wake up in the middle of the night talking in Brijbasi, and he would be chastising Krishna. He'd be saying, you naughty Krishna, give me my lunch bag. I'll tell Mother Yashoda. So from that, they concluded that he was in the Sakiras. We cried all the way back to, the Krishna Balaram Mandir, and it was this very similar feeling to when Srila Prabhupada left, and it was similar with Gurudev, although I wasn't on the scene when Gurudev left. I just heard about it. But Gurudev and I, over the years, became friends. I had actually had an emotional relationship with him. When he came to England, every time I'd go to his darshan or a class, he would come over and embrace me so tightly. And then he would say to me, I am your bosom friend, and that, when he left, that kind of made it even worse. These Vaishnavas, sorry, some of these stories are not so easy to relate. These Vaishnavas come to this world to teach us how to live and how to leave, and their lives are a perfect example of what Krishna consciousness is meant to be. He reasons ill who says that Vaishnavas die while thou art living still in sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living spread the holy name around. So they teach us how to live with Krishna, and they teach us how to leave the body with Krishna in mind. This is important because, among other things, we are constantly receiving impressions at every moment through our senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. Therefore, it is in our best interest to try and keep those impressions as Krishna conscious as possible, because they affect the condition of the subtle body. And whatever condition the subtle body is in at the time of death, that state we will attain without fail. With all these impressions coming in, to me, it implies that the subtle body is constantly morphing. And when that final morph comes, whatever condition it's in, that's going to be our next body. Therefore, Sripad Shankaracharya used to say, Krishna matirastu, keep your attention on Krishna. Boy, don't you just miss them all like anything. I never got too close to Srila Prabhupada. He always had that, entourage of senior devotees in front of him, protecting him, as it were. So I never really got to develop a, face-on-face relationship with him or with Krishnadas Babaji, but I did with Gurudev. Gurudev, I have to say, actually put out the hand of friendship to me and to other devotees in a very, very, very big way. I had also wanted to mention briefly this evening some experiences of my own in my own life to do with death. Wow. Please indulge me, okay? A lot of serious unpleasantness is coming back right now. In 1969, I was engaged to be married, and the girl had a health issue. She was an epileptic, and her mother didn't like me, and her parents were pressuring her to get rid of me, and she was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So I said to her, look, you can't stay in that house. I'm going to come there and kidnap you. It was going to be a Kshatriya marriage. So I went and, her parents were out, and she packed up all her stuff, put it in my car. We drove to my parents' house, and she moved in there, and she was fine. That was February of '69. And after a few months, we wanted to plan our wedding. And, we thought, well, her health is improving. The trigger for her seizures was stress. So, no word of a lie, 4 days before our wedding, she was coming home from work on a bus, had a epileptic seizure-related heart attack, and died right there on the bus. There was a nurse on the bus on her way to a shift in the hospital, told my father, she said, the girl just stood up and fell down. And by the time I got to her to perform CPR, she was gone. For me, that was a game changer. And I guess maybe I'm still pulling out some shrapnel from that one. There was a devotee who moved into the temple shortly after I did. A young boy, only 16 years old. And he was a really good example, in my opinion, of Bhakti Sukriti and all the adhikar that goes with it. He was Mr. Fired Up, Fixed Up, Ki Jai Bliss, knew the Shastras, was eager to go out and distribute books. Srila Prabhupada initiated him Tattvavada. And after some time, he left the Philadelphia temple and he went out to stay in Gitanagari. And when he was there, he eventually became the head pujari. And one day he had driven into town in a Volkswagen Beetle to buy some flowers for the deities. And on his way back, he was sideswiped by an articulated lorry, just flicked him off the motorway like a fly. He crashed into some trees and broke his neck and died instantly. And when we got back to the temple from Sankirtan that day, the temple president said, did you hear about Tattvavada? He was in a car crash. He just broke his neck and died. And there was a devotee there who made a comment that stuck with me all these years. He said, look at that. He says, Tattvavada gets to go back to Godhead, and I have to stay here and rot in the material world. And to this day, that was back in the 70s, maybe 1975. I still remember that to this very day. I was living in Vrindavan on and off from about 1977 to 86. In the 80s, devotees started turning up with different stage 4 cancers, and they wanted to leave their bodies in Vrindavan. The guest house, the Vrindavan guest house, room number 1, after a while, we started to call it the launching pad because so many devotees were coming there, and when they would leave their bodies in room number 1. Well, the one I really remember was a devotee from Canada. His name was Nakadi. He came there with his wife. He was a huge book distributor, but he had a brain tumor that was irreversible. So we used to go around and talk to him and make friends, read the Bhagavatam with him and so many things. And then one morning after Mangal Arti, they informed us that he had left his body in the middle of the night. So the next day, we prepared his body. They brought him in on a stretcher, the final darshan of all the deities, and we carried him down to the burning ghat. Now, I had heard a story that the gurus in the old days would send their disciples to assist in the cremations to help them transcend the bodily conception. Just briefly, speaking of which, I received recently a video text from a devotee friend of mine of a cremation in Vrindavan. And I was looking at it and I was getting some realization. All of a sudden, I realized who it was. I heard them mention his name. It was my godbrother, Vishal. I don't know if anybody remembers Vishal, but Vishal lived in Vrindavan for many years. He was there when I was there. We used to take prasad together. We used to joke together. We used to laugh together, so many things. All of a sudden, there's Vishal on the funeral pyre. That was a real wake-up call for me. But anyway, when we got this devotee's body down to the Yamuna, they put him on the funeral pyre, put ghee all over him, because ghee lights the fire. Ayurveda, people know ghee lights the fire of digestion. And I noticed in the river, where we were near the river, near where we were standing, all these little eyes started coming towards us. And I said to one devotee, "What are these eyes?" And he said to me, "The turtles know the program. They're coming in for their bit." And anyway, then they lit the fire. And of course, India, there wasn't enough wood. The fire went out prematurely. So you can imagine what was staring back at us from that funeral pyre, a half-burned body. It was grotesque. And then somebody said to one of the devotees, "Go and get more wood." So what does he do? He gets a bullock's cart and a buffalo. I said to somebody, "He'll be back in a week." So while we were waiting, one of the devotees called to me. He said, "Raghunath Prabhu, come, I want to show you something." So I walked over, and because of the heat of the fire, the abdominal cavity had ruptured, and all the insides were unraveling right out and onto the sand, the intestines, everything. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, okay, that's all, folks. That's enough for me. I said, I'm going back to the temple. So I walked back to the Krishna Balaram Mandir. I don't even remember walking back. I was in a state of shock. Then I could understand why so many infantry soldiers in the military come back after the war with having that kind of thing in their face all the time, why they have post-traumatic stress disorder. I was in shock. I was actually in shock and didn't even realize it. So when I got back to the temple, I thought to myself, I'll go in my room and sit down. That didn't work. I'll go in my room and lie down on the bed. That didn't work. I went outside. I'll talk to my friends. That didn't work. Then I thought, I'll go to the guest house and speak to devotees there. Where was everybody? In the restaurant eating. That made it even worse. And when I walked back to the Gurukul building, suddenly it occurred to me that I had just been slightly nudged off the bodily platform. It was like a different world. I could not in any way philosophically justify any kind of sense gratification or anything to do with my body. I didn't even realize who I was. And that carried on for almost a month. Finally, I came, descended again to the bodily conception. But that's something that, I'll just, how do you forget something like that? It's still with me. And that was back in the early 80s, after all these years. And, there are a couple of others. When I was living in Boston about 2 years before I came to London, there was a single mother living there with her son. Boy was about 12 years old. His name was Dhruva. And, real friendly kid, typical young teenage boy. And we made friends and we used to joke together. Time came for him to go back to Gurukul. His vacation, his holiday was finished. So he went back to Gita Nagari. And then a couple of weeks later, I get a phone call at the temple from my godbrother, Murli Vadika, who had been in charge of the school there at the time. I said, how's it going, Murli? He said to me, Dhruva is dead. I said, what? He said, Dhruva is dead. You better tell his mother. I said, what happened? He said, we were riding single file on bikes and he was lagging behind and I was telling him to hurry up and a car hit him from behind. He's dead. How do you tell a mother that her son has just been killed? Her reaction was pretty much what you might expect, and you can multiply that by 1,000. I'm, I'm not, I'm nobody special. I'm nothing, but I am still traumatized from these things. Take it, I'm just being honest with all of you. I am still traumatized. My mind is still very disturbed by all these events. Ruchi. I don't know if anybody remembers my godbrother Ruchi. Ruchi was a big book distributor. We used to go on traveling Sankirtan all the time. We were very good friends. The word had it that Ruchi was having trouble following the regulative principles, like a lot of us did, and perhaps still do, but are too ashamed to admit it. And he had heard, we'd all heard, that Vishnu John Swami had a fall down, and Prabhupada said if a sannyasi falls down, he should commit suicide because it's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, but he didn't really want anybody to do it. Vishnu John did it, and Prabhupada was not at all happy about that. So Ruchi had heard that Prabhupada had said the devotee had better commit suicide rather than not follow the order of the spiritual master. So fate would have it, I bump into Ruchi in London at the Radha Londoneshwar temple on Solar Street. We had a brief chat. He was on his way to Vrindavan. So I said to him, look, when you come back, if you come through this way, look me up. Maybe you can come and stay with us for a few days. So he said, okay, and then he left. I didn't hear anything from him for 6 months. One night I was at the temple and a devotee said, did you hear about Ruchi? And I said, no. They said, he went to Vrindavan and he jumped in front of a train. What an image. I don't want to disturb anybody's mind by describing the image. The train driver said that wasn't really his stop. So he was coming into the station at speed and he saw someone on the platform put a gamsha over their head and jump in front of the train. That was Ruchi. They asked Narayan Maharaj about that. This is what I heard. What's going to happen to him? Narayan Maharaj said, apparently, he has killed a Brahmin, meaning himself. But because of all his previous good service, Krishna will make a nice arrangement for him. More closer to home again, in the UK, there was a devotee friend of mine who was, again, visiting the temple for many years. He was a bouncer in the clubs in London. His name was Bernie. And we were good friends because when I first came here, I used to do a lot of classes at Soho Street in the afternoon. And he used to come, and on that basis, we made friends. So I bumped into him at the ISKCON Rath Yatra. I think it was 2010 or 11, I can't remember. A mutual friend of ours turned up, a fellow named Luke McDonald. And the three of us had a nice meeting, and we went to the cafe and we had a little drink and something to eat. And then we all went our separate ways at the end of the, Rath Yatra. Several months later, around November time, I get a text from Luke, who's in Vrindavan attending the Kartik festival. And he said to me, I just wanted you to know, they just put Bernie in the hospital, St. Mary's Hospital in London, with stage 4 lung cancer. I said, well, can we go and visit him? He said, well, that depends on his eldest daughter. His eldest daughter is looking after him. Apparently, from the time he was 18 till about 58, 40 years, he smoked like 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and it finally caught up with him. So I said to Luke, I said, all right, keep me informed. A few weeks later, I get another text. He said, Bernie's been moved to St. John's Hospice in St. John's Wood. So I thought to myself, right, hospital means you got a chance. Hospice means you got no chance. They just make you comfortable until you leave. So I went to see him at St. John's Hospice one night. He was gasping for breath. It was horrific. He couldn't even breathe. His daughter was doing everything right. The whole room was, decked out with Prabhupada photos and Radha Krishna photos and Prabhupada chanting on a tape recorder. And she was putting Vrindavan dust on everybody's head, putting Vrindavan dust in her father's mouth and all that. And so I had to leave because I had to go to work the next day. So I came back the next day and he was completely peaceful. And I said, what happened? They said, well, the devotees from Soho Street came today and had a huge kirtan. Somehow the nurses allowed it. And that's why he's peaceful as you see him. So they said, you can talk to him, go speak in his right ear. So again, I had to leave because I had work the next day. So I went and I spoke in his ear. I said, Bernie, it's Raghunath. I got to go. I got to go to work tomorrow, but I'll come and see you tomorrow, which would have been a Friday and an Ekadasi. So Friday morning, the Ekadasi, I'm on my way to work on the London Underground. I send Luke a text. How's Bernie? He said, Bernie left us at 5 o'clock this morning. My heart fell out from beneath me. From beneath me. And then later, myself and two devotees from the Soviet Street Temple that he had probably mentioned to his family requested us to come and prepare his body for his parents and friends' final viewing. That was, I mean, I just, I'm not well. You know, I'm really not. We went to the funeral parlor and they wheeled him out on a gurney, and he was just, you know, all he had on was a little brief to cover his, you know, privacy. And we had to put a kurta on him. We put a dhoti on him. We put tilak on him. And then we had to move him from the gurney into the coffin. And then that day I understood what the phrase dead weight means. It was incredible. And handsome fellow, even in death. He looked like a young Sean Connery. I couldn't believe it. And then after we fixed him up, we went outside for a while. And then his parents
five more minutes. Raghunath
5 minutes,
Prabhu.
okay. And then after that 5 minutes, we came back, said our goodbyes, and we left. Material world. When I was a young teenager, there was one of our guys in our group who was the first one to get what they called a hot car. Somehow he managed to get a 1962 Corvette Stingray. And he would do crazy things like drive the wrong way in a one-way system. And we used to shout to him, you know, that's a one-way street. And he would say, I'm only going one way. Well, one day he had a head-on collision with a articulated lorry on the motorway, and he was decapitated. They found the car mangled, and they found his head sitting on the passenger seat. The irony. Wow. I wish I could say something really philosophical to tie all this together, but as devotees, we have hope. Srila Prabhupada gave an explanation of death. He said, right now, you're sitting here, but if you get up and walk away, your sitting opportunity is not lost. You'll always have another place to sit down. He said, similarly, now you're sitting in that body. When you leave that body, you will be sitting in another one. And Krishna says it in Bhagavad Gita, I am sitting in everyone's heart, and I am guiding the wanderings of all living entities who are sitting on a machine made of the material energy. So anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I hope I haven't said anything that offended anyone, but I just wanted to share some experiences. As the Christians say, no one knoweth the day or the hour when that moment will come. Hare Krishna.
Very well. Thank you. Wow, Haribol. Thank you for sharing all of these deeply personal experiences. You also said to me, don't excessively praise at the end or anything, but I do want to express my personal gratitude for being so open about such, you know, such deep and traumatic events, and hearing stories like this. I think in today's day and age, we're so removed from death sometimes. Like my family who I'm living with are eating meat, but I can see they're so removed from the death of that animal because everything's packaged in such a way. I even saw there was once some posts on a vegan website about how in Sainsbury's they were starting to put the chicken fillets, sorry again for graphic details, in like plastic slips, so you didn't even have to touch the meat as you put it in the pan. So we're so removed from death, but death is really all around us. We even, I mean, it's spring now and there's a lot of life, but as we walk down the street in autumn, we see all the leaves falling from the trees, and it's just a reminder of our mortality, how nothing is certain, as you said. So thank you by sharing these very real, very powerful personal stories. Thank you for allowing us and reminding us of the reality of our existence in this material world. So we're going to move to question and answers now. I want to encourage all of you with questions on this topic. I'm sure many of you have many questions. I'm posting a link in the chat. I want to encourage all of you to click on the link and submit your questions. If you have a question you want to ask out loud, please send me a personal message and I can call on you. Okay, I'm going to go to our first question, which is, how do we continue to have a connection with the ones we love once they have left their body? How can we build that connection while that person is still on this planet? What are the ways that we can work on creating spiritual connections beyond the physical form and connection? So that's basically asking, how do we continue to have connection with loved ones after they've left? How can we develop a spiritual connection with loved ones while they're still present, so that, that connection is not material? I want to ask Bhagavat Maharaj, Shripad Bhagavat Maharaj, if he wants to say anything in response.
Om Jnana Timirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksuran Militan Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manabhistam Savitan Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupam Kadamaya Dadanti Swavadantikam. My humble obeisances unto the lotus feet of my Shiksha and Diksha Guru, Srila Prabhupada, and my Shiksha and Sannyas Guru, Srila Narayan Maharaj, Srila Gurudev, and to all of my Shiksha Gurus and to the Rupanuga Guru Varga, and my Dandavat Pranams to all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis who are present here today, my Dandavat Pranams. Can you all hear me? Am I clear? Loud enough?
Loud and clear, Maharaj.
First of all, I want to offer my respects and my thanks to Sriman Raghunath Das Prabhu for a very powerful presentation of vivid examples and experiences that help us to put into perspective the experience of death and how death strikes us and will strike us. There is no question of it not happening. When Srila Prabhupada was lying in the bed in Vrindavan and his body, I was there, his body was deteriorating before our eyes. The Ayurvedic doctor said that his kidneys were disintegrating inside of his body, that his body was just dissolving in front of us. He looked like an Auschwitz survivor. His bones were visible everywhere. His organs were visible. Skin was translucent. And he looked at us one day and he said, "Don't think this won't happen to you. You will all," because we were all young boys. I was 26 years old. "Don't think this won't happen to you. You will also this end. So Srila Prabhupada displayed for us what the end is going to be. He showed us very vividly by his activities, so that we would have a firsthand experience of what was going to happen. So thank you, Raghunath Prabhu, for your very powerful presentation. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Now, to address the question of the person, you have to understand the difference between the gross physical body, the subtle astral body, and the connection of those bodies, and the actual home of who you are, the soul. So the gross physical body we know is made of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The subtle astral body, which lives inside the gross physical body, is composed of mind, intelligence, and false ego. The connection between those two bodies is the 7 chakras, the Muladhara chakra, the Swadhisthana chakra, the Manipur chakra, the Anhat chakra, the Vishuddha chakra, the Agna chakra, and the Sahasra chakra. And these 7 chakras connect the subtle and gross bodies like a cord. And this is how we have out-of-body experiences. We may have a dream of flying or floating in the universe, or floating over our bed. Moving about in another location than our bedroom. I've had many such out-of-body experiences myself. I was once in a previous life in my Grihastha ashram, a licensed foster parent. We had some young girls who had been abused by their father. And one of them related to me how when her father would come in the room to do this, she would leave her body and go to the ceiling and float over her body and watch the act, because she couldn't bear being inside of her body while her father was doing this to her. So these out-of-body experiences are there. They happen. And the soul, who we are, is inside that astral body, inside that subtle body, in the area of the heart chakra, the Anhat chakra. And the consciousness, this is explained in verse 34 of the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Just like the soul, the sun is in one area in the universe, and the sunshine is all over the universe. The soul is in one area of the body, and the consciousness spreads all over the body from the soul throughout the subtle and gross body. So what happens is, Vair Gandhamivashi, he quoted that Yantrudurani Mayaya, that the soul is seated within the body like on a machine. The body is a machine, and it's carrying the soul in the subtle body. And then Vair Gandhamivashayat, just like the fragrance of the incense travels across the temple from one area of the building to the other, similarly, the subtle body carries the soul to the next physical body. And the soul and the consciousness remains intact within that subtle body. That's the chitta, the contaminated consciousness, and it carries with it the impressions, okay, of the previous life. This is why you will see a young girl on YouTube. I watched one time, she was 4 years old. She was sight reading music and playing piano. How is that possible? She brought that with her from the previous life. Similarly, the Sukriti is brought with you from the previous life. When my son was 2 years old, he was doing arti for 2 hours in the house because he had seen it, and it stimulated the act in his consciousness from his previous life. So he started doing arti for 2 hours. So these impressions are there. The impressions are there. So now, in the due course of general public, okay, the general public has a deep attachment to the body. And the body is developed by the consciousness, the contaminated consciousness attachment to the, what we call the ahankara, or the false ego. And due to that attachment, the body, the bodily conception of that previous body is very dominant within the consciousness. This is why when we see ghosts, we see a young girl has died, the ghost is a young girl. We see an old man has died, the ghost is an old man. Why is that? Because the false ego is projecting, the false ego of the subtle body is projecting the consciousness, the contaminated consciousness of the previous body. And so in the cases of that, we see that people in near-death experiences, there's a lot of research that I've done on near-death experiences and what they call shared death experiences, where, for instance, a daughter or son is in the room with the mother or the sister or whoever is dying, and they're experiencing death, and they're experiencing angels coming, or they're experiencing some hellish condition, and the person who is physically attached to their body, their consciousness, their subtle body also experiences what the person who's dying experiences. This is called a shared death experience. There's a physician who wrote a book about this. His name will come to me when it does, I'll tell you. And so what happens in these near-death experiences, people often see relatives, uncles, aunts, fathers, mothers, grandfathers, grandmothers. These personalities, if they're very attached to their ancestry and to staying connected to that, end up in a place called Petri Loka. And in Petri Loka, they remain in some level of consciousness of that previous form. In a book and a movie, which again, I'll remember the name eventually, of a real life experience where the boy dies in the hospital, and then he comes back to life, and he tells about his experience of going to heaven and what happened when he was in heaven. And it's very, very, Heaven is for Real is the name of the movie and the book. Heaven is for Real. And he describes that to his mother. He said, when I was in heaven, this baby girl came up to me and said that she was in your tummy and she died. And the mother had had a miscarriage in a previous, but prior to giving birth to the son, she had a miscarriage. So there was some connection there, and that subtle body recognized this boy as being connected to the same mother. Then we see that he met with his father's father, who he had never met. The boy says that I met Grandpa. And he said, you met Grandpa, but you died before Grandpa, you weren't born before Grandpa. Grandpa died before you were born. He said, no, I met Grandpa. He told me that he was your father. And then what happens is he shows him a picture of his father, very elderly. And the boy said, no, in heaven, nobody is old. They're all young looking. And so then he gets a picture of his father as a young man in the army, and he shows him that. He goes, yeah, that's who I met. That's your father. That's grandpa. He came up to me and said to say hello to you when I come back. So we have some evidence that in near-death experiences, people connect with ancestors and relatives of other personalities because the subtle body is still material. The subtle body is still material. The subtle body is not spiritual. And because it's still material, it has connection with karma and karmic connections to previous ancestry and previous bodies and previous lives, past lives, etc. And so the subtle body being material does have some connection, and there can be some connections that sometimes people experience, like in the case of this boy coming back from a near-death experience and talking about it. So that's from the material platform. When, according to Srimad Bhagavatam, the subtle body, this is in the 3rd canto, 25th chapter, verse 33, the subtle body dissolves. The false ego, the mind, and the intelligence dissolve. When they dissolve, then the spiritual form manifests. And that spiritual form achieves bhav. It's still a bit covered by the koshas, the 2 koshas, which I don't remember where I talked about this. I've been on so many lectures, but there's 2 koshas, the Vijnanamoya Kosh and the Anandamoya Kosh. These 2 koshas still cover the soul. They're very subtle sheaths, more subtle than the subtle body, the astral body. And they cover the soul until the person removes his desire for accessing the gyan of the differentiation between things and the ananda, the ecstasies of spiritual life. When those things are gone, and we have experience of this from Gurudev's purport in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 10th canto that just came out, the Panchadhyaya Ras, the 5 Ras Leelas, when the 8th verse of, I forget which chapter, I think it's the 20th, the 20th chapter, in the 8th verse or 9th verse, it talks about the gopis who were boarded up, their husbands locked the doors and didn't allow them to go to Ras Leela. And there's a long description by Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur about the fact that they were in bhav and there was some defect because they actually had children. And because they enjoyed having children with someone during, even, and you can imagine, you're all the way in Bom Leela in Gokul, and you have a desire for having a relationship with the opposite sex and having a baby. And because of that, you get prevented from going to Ras Leela. When they realized the mistake that they made, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says they burned up those koshas in bed. And by Gurudev says in the commentary that by burning up those koshas, then eventually in another night they go to the Ras Leela. So powerful. The material contamination is so strong that it can carry with you there to the Bom Leela in Gokul. So you have to be very, very serious about, as he was talking about, the impressions that go on the chitta, on the contaminated consciousness, to stop them from over to the next body. Then there's a whole other thing. I mean, I could go on for an hour about how the consciousness withdraws itself from the subtle body, from the gross body, and into the subtle body, and then leaves the body. But that's another topic. So this gives some answer to the question. As long as you're attached to that subtle body and that subtle false ego, you will have some connection with your relatives and ancestors, etc. That will be there. It may not be like you're having a discussion like we're having now, but in dream or in other ways, you may experience it like that, or in a near-death experience, you may experience it like that.
Thank you, Maharaj. Just as a brief spoiler, actually, one of our questions, one that I'm going to ask soon, is what happens when the soul does leave the body. So we'll be coming back to you to hear your response. So as you were answering that question, I found out that that question was not anonymous, but it was in fact from Diva, Didi, our dear Diva from London. Well, not from London, but in London. If she wants to repeat the question again, I'm going to invite you, Diva, to come on and unmute yourself and repeat the question. So for the rest of the panelists, they can hear it again in your own words as opposed to mine.
Question I wrote to you, Prabhu. Hari Bol, everybody in the butts. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. My question was, Maharaj, you know, when somebody that you love passes away, there's obviously a lot of attachment. And just to, you know, something a very close friend of mine and I have gone through recently. She's actually gone through it, but I am awaiting this, as both of our grandparents are old, and one there's a very close bond with, and then there's one that there's love, of course, but there's not a very close bond. And with my grandma, who I don't have a very close bond with, I'm praying to Krishna that he takes her. I'm hoping every single day that, you know, she goes. And with my other grandmom, I'm hoping that she goes well on her 2 feet, but there's so much fear of losing her. And, you know, the sense of attachment is very strong when you love somebody. And there's, of course, a lot of sadness when they go. But, you know, in some way, we're also taught to be happy for their soul to be passing on. So just want to understand, what is your advice, and what is the advice of, you know, of Krishna consciousness to deal with a loved one passing away? And what, you know, sometimes I feel like we don't allow ourselves to feel, and, you know, feeling that it's not right to mourn somebody's death, but there's a lot of confusion, really. So if you could just help shed some light on that, please, Maharaj.
Sure. Grieving is an important part of dealing with the material, mundane emotions in the material world. If you don't let go of those emotions, the material emotions, you can't make progress in your spiritual life. You will, if you stuff those emotions down, if you fail to deal with them and experience them and let them go, the result will be that they'll come up in another way, another form. Some people will go to their addiction. For me, my addiction is food. I end up eating more than I'm supposed to. So whatever your addiction is, you'll fall back on that position, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs or some other, you know, binge watching Netflix or whatever it may be. You're going to go back to that to try and block out the impression of that mundane impression of grief. In Ayurveda, we say that when you have in the section called Bhuta Vidya, psychology, that we say that you have to recognize the emotion in meditation, that you meditate on that emotion, you recognize it, you experience it, you taste it, and then you will it away from your consciousness. That, okay, I'm done with this, I've digested it, and now I have to let go of it, because it's not healthy to hold on to grief, just like it's not healthy to suppress it. Either suppression or failure to release will cause subtle body indigestion. And when there's indigestion, emotional indigestion, it will descend into the physical body as physical indigestion. Physical indigestion will cause you to create ama when you're eating your food. And then the ama will find whatever place karma has designated, whether it's joint pain or heart attack or whatever, that is designated for your karma, for your life. It will go into that place. That ama will go there, and that ama will cause disease. So first you have to get rid of the subtle ama, okay? And then you get rid of the whole other thing. In the prayer to the Avanti Bor Brahman, it's very, very clear. He says it's not these people. If you read that story about the Avanti Bor Brahman, he becomes a sannyasi and everybody abuses him. He says it's got nothing to do with them. And it's got nothing to do with karma even. And it's got nothing to do with the planets or astrology. It's got nothing to do with any of that. It's got to do with my mind. Whether my mind is connected to it or disconnected from it. Meaning whether I'm identifying with the physical realm or I'm identifying with the spiritual realm. And if you're why the Ayurvedic doctor told us quite clearly that Prabhupada's kidneys were disintegrating, yet he wasn't taking any pain medication. I don't know about you, but if my kidneys were disintegrating without pain medication, I'd be howling. Prabhupada was just lying there peacefully. How is that possible? That's possible because his consciousness was in transcendence of the physical realm. So we have to try and move in that direction. Obviously, we're not there. We still have this body. We're still very attached to this body. But Srila Prabhupada repeated over and over again in practically every lecture he gave us, you're not this body. You're not this body. And the other thing he always said was sex life is abominable, because the more we either meditate on sex or try to enjoy sex in any shape, form, or manner, we become attached to the body. Sex has to do with the body. So the more we're connected to sex, the more we're connected to the body. Whether it's subtle sex or gross sex, it's bodily identification. And that bodily identification will cause us pain. So we have to give up our attachment to this thing by trying to process and digest these emotions. And grief is one of them. And so you're going to have some grief. Accept the grief. Invite it into your consciousness. Okay, I have grief. Then meditate on that and experience the grief. Cry. Do whatever it is that you have to do to let go of the grief. And then pray to Krishna, okay, I want to let go of this grief now. I'm done with it. I've had a healthy cry. I've let go of my attachment to this personality who is described in the Bhagavatam that when you stand on the bank of the ocean, on the shore of the ocean, and you see the straws coming in, and the straws come together, and then they part. So it's said that just like that, some souls come together in a family or a relationship and then they dissipate. We think of it in real time of the physical body as being something very, very painful, but it's only happening at warp speed. It's happening at the speed of mind. It's very quick and will disappear from our life very quickly. Does that help, Jiva? Huh? I
You're on
can't
mute,
hear you.
Diva.
Sorry,
Diva.
I forgot. Yes, I'm muted. Thank you, Maharaj. That does help to a large extent. Actually, it's just about actually holding on to that understanding that
Yeah.
obviously takes practice.
Uh-huh.
Is there any way we can? Sorry, Tarun, may I?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm gonna ask some of the other panelists if they'd like to respond. Sorry. We're a bit short on time, so Badara Prabhu,
Thank you.
if you'd like to unmute, if you have anything to add.
Well, I have a few things to add, maybe. Well, the first is that I've been asking Bhagavad Maharaj to get his book out. I suggested the idea of him writing a book about death and the science of death. How many years ago was that, Maharaj? And so, you know, I know he's an encyclopedia of knowledge, direct and indirect, about the subject. And, you know, all I can say is that, well, why would I take the floor when he's in the room and he can really speak so authoritatively about it? I'll just echo, you know, one point. You know, Lalita and I, recently had an experience where, you know, a longtime friend of mine, Bert Mulder, who I've known for about 35 years and who I worked very closely with for 15 years. He passed away a year ago, just over a year ago, right?
18 months.
18 months ago. I think that Maharaj's point is a very, very good one, that grieving and acknowledging your emotions is actually a really important part of a healthy process related to death. It doesn't seem natural at all to, on the face of what you might call spirituality, to deny your emotional experience about losing a loved one. I think in modern psychological terms, they now call that spiritual bypassing, where you use spiritual tenets or ideas to avoid difficult emotional problems. And the general understanding of that is that you can avoid them, as Maharaj said, but they're going to kind of still sit with you and they're going to affect you. You're going to sit in your subtle body, and then they're going to affect how you eat and digest, and then it's going to create other kind of poisons in the body and so on. So being honest, of course, is I think really the right way to do it. In the case of Bert, we were lucky that we had some knowledge about him dying or going to die, and we were able to work with him and help him and encourage him and coach him to let's say open up his consciousness to you know, the way forward into his next life. And he was already a very evolved mind already. He's probably one of the most amazing minds I've had a chance to work with. And so he took it on board, didn't he? And I would say he had a successful death as a result. So what I gathered from what Maharaj is really trying to say is that preparation seems to be like an important part of, you know, the death process. And so, you know, being conscious of our mental attachments, whether that's to the physical body, the subtle, this gross sex, subtle sex, whatever form of attachment we have. We know in the case of Judd Barrett that, you know, in his previous life, he was attached to a deer. He became not even really attached. He became a little bit attentive to the needs of a deer as a kind soul, as a kind-hearted soul, and as a result, he had to take birth as a deer in the next life. So sometimes we can look at these things in a kind of very religious kind of way. What I like about what Bhagavat Maharaj does is he talks about it from a spiritual, scientific kind of way. It's not, you know, that things are happening to us. It's that this is the way the machine works, the machine of the material energy. And if we can understand the ins and outs of how it works, we can, using spiritual knowledge and blessings from our guru, we can adjust ourselves to interacting with that machine and gradually go to a more transcendental place. So I'd say just, yeah, grieve, but then like what Maharaj said is also let go, because I've heard also, Maharaj can probably speak to this, that when you become overly attached in your grief, I mean, obviously from the point of view that it's not good for you, he's already made that case, but I've heard that sometimes that intense attachment, if the soul hasn't gone on and taken another body, that it can kind of bind the soul in its subtle form to not take a birth immediately, but to be stuck around in a kind of a subtle body, a spirit body, and not be able to kind of progress on to the next level. I don't know. Do you want to say something about that, Maharaj?
No,
Is that right?
that's been how do you say revealed in experiences that people have had with a near death and other experiences. There was a story that I read recently of an Indian man who took a loan from somebody and then he died without paying the loan. And he came to his son in a dream and he said, because I owed this man money, I had to take birth in his house as a dog.
Oh dear.
He said, if you pay him the money back, then I can die and move on to the next human birth. And so he did. The son went there and paid the man. He said, I understood that my father owed you money when he died. He said, yes. And how much was it? And he gave him the money. And within a few days, the dog died. So there's, you know, these karmic things are, karma is very complicated. It's extremely complicated. There's no cut linear line from A to B to C to D. And yeah, grief and other things can cause the soul to hover or take births, you know, be stalled in its progress to the next level of progression in the spiritual path. And so it's very important that we do everything that we can. Srila Prabhupada said when Jayananda was leaving, they wrote him and said that all the devotees were standing around him chanting kirtan, and he was reciting kirtan at the time of his death. And Prabhupada said, if this is the case, then he's gone on to the spiritual platform. So we have to do what we can to create that atmosphere for ourselves when we're departing. That kirtan is happening, just like Raghunath was talking about a friend of his, where his daughter had the tapes playing and the pictures and all of these things. And so we have to create that atmosphere by which we can be reminded of our actual destination and not meditate on the body. And as you so appropriately said, because I just finished writing about Bharat Maharaj in my book and that pastime, he was just absorbed in the the deer got lost, and so he was feeling concerned that what's going to happen to this poor deer, and being absorbed in running through the forest looking for him, he fell in a hole and died, thinking about the deer. And as a result, he had to take birth as a deer. It was almost like by accident. And it was just out of, a soft-hearted compassion for the poor animal. And I make a point in my book about how he should have really given the deer to some householder couple that was taking care of animals, and allowed himself to just be absorbed in his own spiritual pursuits. He shouldn't have allowed himself to be put into that position. So this is what the renunciate has to do. When you get that far, that he gave up the whole world. He was king of the whole world. He had every pleasure imaginable available to his senses. He gave all of that up to go to the Himalayas to meditate, and he became absorbed in this little deer. So this is a very, very difficult thing. Very difficult.
Thank you, Maharaj. Okay, if Raghunath Prabhu is still here, I'd like to invite him to answer Diva's question. Raghunath?
Can you please repeat? I think she had 3 questions. Could you please repeat them again?
Diva, do you want to do that?
Sure. Haribol Prabhu.
Haribolji.
My question was about, what is the right way really about when somebody leaves their body, how do we feel? And I guess, Vidara Prabhu also talked about preparation, how to prepare for somebody who you love, their death, and whether grief is okay, and how do you process it, and what's the confusion? There's a lot of confusion, so just to iron out this confusion, really.
What's the confusion exactly?
The confusion is that you're sad this person is gone, but you also you realize that sadness is because of your material attachment to this human being, and at the same time, if they've passed and they've lived their time, that it should be in some way some sort of celebration that they've been able to leave this material world.
Well, in my personal experience with these kinds of things, including my own mother and father and so many other people, you got to be who you are. There's no set formula that everybody can plug into. You want to cry? Cry. You get over it when you get over it. There is no rush whatsoever. And there is no shame either. I remember when I first joined, again, because we were very young and very stupid, when I took shelter of some devotees back in those days and told them about some deaths I experienced that were causing me a lot of trouble, the feedback I got was, well, that's Maya, Prabhu. We're not this body, Prabhu. Pass the sweet rice, Prabhu. All this insensitive, just totally, I would say, adolescent reply, my mother and father, they've been gone since Dad left in 2000, Mom left in 2006. I talk to them every day as if they were here. I talk to them every day. I wish them well. I pray to Srila Narayana Maharaj Gurudev to keep them in a place where they're always going to be peaceful and happy. and I feel their presence. I have a photograph of them, in my home now. And every morning I offer some incense to my deities. I offer it to them as well. I want them to get some kind of benefit. And like I say, I do remember them. All these people that I was mentioning in my life earlier, I'm still grieving for a lot of people. And as far as I'm concerned, that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I have nothing to prove to anybody, that it doesn't bother me. I'm an advanced devotee. That's nonsense, absolute nonsense. I think what's happened over the years as devotees, we have dehumanized ourselves in many ways. We've not allowed ourselves to grieve. We have not allowed ourselves to feel the feelings. Why? Because we're concerned about what everybody else might think. Absolute nonsense as far as I'm concerned. My suggestion to you is feel the feelings. Pray to Guru and Krishna for the welfare of your family members, whoever it is, and talk to them, talk to them, in a very intimate and very human way. I told you, that's what I'm saying to you. I do that with my family members every day, and I feel like they're right there in the room. Even not just family members, but others, and I can feel their presence. And I pray to Guru and Krishna every day for their benefit, for their welfare, and I have full faith. The real secret, as far as I'm concerned, is in the chanting of the holy name, because that's what takes you above and beyond the gross and subtle bodily conceptions. And the more you chant, the higher up you go. And the higher up your consciousness goes, the more you leave behind. It's a natural, gradual process. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada said what? Krishna consciousness is simple for the simple. Or we can make it as complex as we want, But don't be afraid to be human. Don't be afraid to feel the feelings. Don't be afraid to grieve. There is no rush and there is no shame. You digest these things when you digest these things. Your time frame and my time frame, because we're individuals, may not be the same. It may take you longer than I, or it may take me longer than you, but it is a natural process, and there's no rush, no compulsion.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Feel the feelings. Let yourself feel bad. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, I'm done.
Can I say something?
Yeah, I was just about to ask you, Shashwini Didi.
Put the picture on, I guess. Hang on, wait. How do I put the picture? Okay. Okay. Haribol Deva.
Haribol.
Dandavats to everyone. Yeah, actually, this is a really, really interesting topic and very, very interesting point, because I just actually read a lecture on the YouTube recently about this very point, which I've been sending to people and haven't managed to get anybody to listen to yet. It's on this exact point about feeling the feelings and not just giving philosophy. Because when we cut off our feelings, it deadens us. And Bhakti is all about feelings. Bhakti means that we come to the clearest, most completely alive feelings for Krishna and for our real self, who we are. So when we constantly deaden our feelings, actually we can't feel. If you deaden one part of your feelings are dead. So the idea is that, as Maharaj gave an amazing example there too, he gave that whole process to feel it and think about it, allow yourself to go through it, and then to say to Krishna, okay, the time's up now, I'm done with that. Then we can still have full feelings for our Krishna consciousness. So this is a really, really important point. And I think, I just wrote something down here, was it? Yeah, what we do is, as we progress in Krishna consciousness, we don't progress to no feelings. We actually progress to full feelings, but by hearing from the sadhus, by reading, by discussing in programs like this, we come to a deeper perception of the reality of the situation. As we put those impressions in more and more, it actually becomes more a reality, that we see the bigger picture. Srila Prabhupada said, first, we're a child and we just have that consciousness that we're part of the mother. And then actually we're conscious there are other people in the family. And then we're conscious there are friends, and then a community. And then we might become a nationalist. And then some people want to save the world. Prabhupada said, now you have to add in the spiritual world as well. Then you've got a full consciousness. So if we can gradually, by reading, discussing together, hearing from the sadhus, if we can constantly put in this fuller picture, so that actually we can feel with that full picture. So we grieve, and then we can actually go to that bigger picture and keep that, and we can keep full feelings this way. It's really important, because so many people, including myself over the years, have deadened my feelings so much in the name of, you know, what I'm supposed to feel, what I'm not supposed to feel. And it actually, it puts like a cloud on your bhakti, and you can't actually experience even what you may have experienced before. So this is a really important topic. It's so, so important. Yes, so that to feel the feelings is very, very important. But just to see with that bigger picture, to add in the spiritual as well. And you can also, after they've gone, you can have a picture of them, and you can offer flowers on your altar for their passage, and, you know, for their next life, even though they may have taken birth again. Actually, everything you do to with Krishna flowers and things like that, remembrance and prayers, it actually affects their future. So like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yashashwini Didi. Badara Prabhu is going to add 5 words on.
Yeah, just very briefly. I've had a recent realization that one of the things that we've experienced as Westerners coming into Krishna consciousness is that we've had to learn a lot. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of philosophy. And in order to imbibe the culture of Krishna consciousness, we've had to read a lot of books, and the tendency has been then to become more in our heads than in our hearts. But really a mature, or at least Kanishta, early Kanishta stage of bhakti is when there's a coherence between the head and the heart. And that's what we're looking for. So we need the head to guide us, but really, as Yashashwini says, it's just, how do we live with heart? That's the main thing. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much, Badara Prabhu. Okay, so we're short on time, but we still have quite a few questions. So what I'm going to ask is, I'm going to ask a couple questions, very brief answers, specifically from Sripad Bhagavat Maharaj, because he has a lot of expertise on the technicality of this subject. And then I'm going to ask a final question for all of the panelists. I think there might be some panelists online who haven't spoken tonight. Can you send me a message, or can you come online on the camera if you haven't spoken tonight, so I know I can ask you at the end for your response. So yes, Maharaj, I'm going to ask you 1 or 2 questions now, and they're complex questions, complex topics, but I'm going to ask if you can limit your answers to 1 minute, just 3, 4, 5 sentences. Forgive me. I know they're questions, you know, that you could spend a long time on, but because we're short on time,
I will do my best.
Okay, I might have to put you on mute, Maharaj, if you go on. Although it's very hard, you know, once you get going. I was listening to you the other day. I felt very inspired, but I'll tell you about that later. Sorry. Okay, the first question, 1 minute. What happens to the soul when one leaves the body? Where does it go? And what is the process the soul experiences?
Okay, so in the Upanishads, there's an explanation. I've already told you about the subtle and gross body and and the chakras that connect. Okay, so you know that the soul is in the area of the heart, the Anhat chakra, and the consciousness is broadcast from the soul throughout the subtle and gross body. When the physical body deteriorates to a point where it is no longer viable, then the consciousness starts to retract itself from all of your senses. And it's explained in the Upanishads how you start losing your sense of touch, your sense of smell, your sense of taste. And the last thing to go is your sense of vision. There's a certain point where your eyes stop seeing in color and you start seeing in black and white. And when that happens, you know that the time is coming very near. And the consciousness retracts itself completely into the heart chakra, into the subtle body. And in the physical body, where the heart has that dip in it, a light starts to appear. And the subtle body starts to leave the physical body, carrying the soul with it to the next destination. This is all supervised. Srila Prabhupada talks about it in the Bhagavad Gita, that the planets, the time of day, the season of the year, the month of the year, the directions, all of these are demigods. And depending on your karma and your etc., if you're going to another human birth on this plane, those demigods, which are part of the planets, etc., carry the subtle body with the soul to the next human body, or to the, if you're going down to an animal body, the agents of Yamaraj will grab the soul and carry it down to an animal body and train it to then again go into an animal form and live like an animal. And then eventually you rise up again to the human form. If you're going to Swarga, to the heavenly planets, there's demigods from there that will come and help move you there. If you're going to Brahmaloka, there's demigods from Brahmaloka that will come and help supervise your transition. For the Vaishnavas, for the devotees, it's usually the Guru or the Vishnu Dutas which come and they help supervise your transition even into another, if you got to go to another human body before you go to Vaikuntha or the spiritual world, and they supervise your transition to a Vaishnava family, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this gives you a little bit of an idea about how the process works.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you for keeping it short and sweet. Okay, so the next question, which seems to be quite a personal question to someone, but also I think a lot of different people have this kind of issue, and also one that you can spend quite a bit of time on, but I'm going to ask you also to have a brief 1 minute answer, to give 1 minute answer if possible. How can we get rid of dead people, friends, when they are still visiting and disturbing us? I've been having this experience for many, many years, even in Krishna consciousness. They have not left.
Perform what's called the Shraddha ceremony. So you get a picture of the person. And then what you do is you perform the ceremony in which you offer a nice feast to the deities. Then you Mahaprasadam and put it on a plate and put it in front of the picture of the person and offer him the prasadam, the Mahaprasadam. You do a kirtan, you invite everybody over, Brahmins, Vaishnavas, etc. That plate, which is offered to him, carries with it all the karma that's keeping him in bound up to the material connection of that person, that he keeps disturbing the person. and then you offer that plate to the animals, let them eat it. You offer the feast which you've cooked for the deity to the Brahmin Vaishnavas and give donations, cloths, whatever. And this should help to get the person to leave you alone. Someone is asking if you don't know the person. If you don't know the person, then you just ask, if you don't have a picture of the person. I don't understand. I think what you're talking about is a ghost that's coming to bother you. If it's a ghost that's coming to bother you, then you can just leave the place where the ghost is coming to bother you and let the ghost eat that plate, and then take it and distribute it to the animals, if that's the case, okay? If you don't have a picture. So if the ghost is coming to bother you when you sleep at night, after you make the offering, put the plate in the room and invite the ghost to come and eat the prasadam, and then let him move on.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you for so concisely explaining a very specific process. I feel like very grateful that
And
you.
a quick question. Can the Shringadev prayers help?
Well, of course, the Shringadev prayers can always help.
Okay.
But the reason he's bothering him is because he wants something on the physical plane.
Okay.
And so when you pacify that desire by having him take prasadam, then I'm ameliorate. I mean, this is the system. It's called Shraddha. And if you don't know who the entity is, then you can do it the way I just explained it at the end. But if you know, if it's your grandfather who keeps bothering you, that means that there's some problem that he's having, just like the story of that Indian man who had the dream that his father came to say, I'm a dog in this man's house. Pay the bill, that I owe him money, and then I can get out of that birth. And he did. The dog died a couple of days later. So karma is complicated, very, very complicated. Bhishma was suffering on battlefield with the arrows in his back from something he did 101 births ago, and Mandavya Rishi was about to be impaled on a spear for something he did as a child in that very birth. When the karma comes, how it comes, why it comes is very complicated. Very complicated.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maharaj. It might be nice to do a separate class. In fact, it is on the short list to do a holistic bhakti session on karma. Maybe we'll ask you to speak, Maharaj. Anyway, that's a discussion for another time. Okay, so we have time for one more question, and we're going to do like a quick fire answers from the panelists, so that all the panelists can answer, but also answer with no more than 2 sentences. So that way we can hear from everyone and end on that note. The question is, how can we use death to address attachment to identity and thus move through our lives in a more transcendental way? So I'm going to repeat that in a second, but I just want to confirm. I know Raghunath Prabhu is not here anymore, but I'm going to ask Maharaj, I'm going to ask Badara Prabhu, I'm going to ask Yashodananda Prabhu, I'm going to ask Shashwini Didi, I'm going to ask, I think Jagatam Didi might still be here, but I'm not sure. I'm going to ask her. It would be lovely to hear from you, Didi, if you are here. I'm also going to ask Charu Chandrika Didi as well. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that question again. How can we use death to address attachment to identity and thus move through our lives in a more transcendental way? So, Yashodananda Prabhu, I'm going to ask you first.
Dandavats, see death as transformation, and you have two shoulders. Let death sit on one shoulder and Shri Gurudev on the other.
Thank you, Prabhu. And thank you for keeping it brief. Okay. I partly asked you because I knew that I could depend on you for that, to set the example for the rest of the panelists. Okay, Maharaj, you're next.
Can you wait?
Okay, yes. Okay, we're gonna go to someone else. Okay, Yashashwini Didi.
Unmute. Okay, if I understood the question correctly, death actually is like moving house. You're not actually dying, just moving from one house to the next. And if you've saved a lot of money, then you can get a really good house. And if you haven't bothered saving, then you don't get such a good house. So throughout our life, we should be thinking that the activities we're doing and the pious things that we're building up is actually giving us a good body next time. So we can link our whole life and our whole activities, our thoughts, our dealings with others to that swapping. The soul is moving, actually. We're just leaving the body behind. So.
Thank you, Shashwini. Okay, I'm gonna ask Jagatam Didi next, if she's here. Are you here, Jagatam? Okay, I'm gonna presume that she isn't. And if she is, then you can send me a message, Jagatam Didi. Okay, I'm gonna ask Badara Prabhu.
Take every chance that you have in your day or week to allow your ego to die a little bit when you encounter a difficult situation. Surrender a little bit of your ego to that, allow it to die in that. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Prabhu. I'm going to ask Charu Chandrika Didi.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
No worries, no worries. I'm happy to repeat it again, and thank you for coming on. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. How can, and just one or two sentences, how can we use death to address attachment to identity and thus move through our lives in a more transcendental way?
Oh, that's quite a question. Anyway, well, I always remember that Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he said,
2 sentences.
Sorry, that we should live our life like we're just about to die. We should chant, Harinam like we're just about to die. So actually death is the most important time of our life. So this is actually a great opportunity for us to really, especially for devotees, everything that we're doing on our practices is for that time. So, of course, non-devotees is a little bit different, but yeah, it's everything that we're chanting, everything that we're hearing in Harikatha, everything we can do in a very, very concentrated way if we think we're just about to die. So yeah, this is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Charu. Thank you for coming on and sharing. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Maharaj, are you ready now? Yes, you look ready. You also get a 2-sentence reminder, Maharaj.
Sentence reminder.
2 sentences max. You get the reminder.
Just don't use any punctuation. You're fine, Maharaj.
and sorry, Maharaj.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm trying to formulate the two sentences in my head. Okay, so in the Gita, it states of that which is impermanent, there is no, it does not stay, and that which is permanent, there is no cessation. So death is a chance for us to understand that the impermanent will leave our view, our vision, and the permanent will live forever.
Thank you, Maharaj. Okay, so thank you everyone who came. Thank you to our guest speaker, Shriman Raghunath Prabhu. Thank you to all of the panelists, to everyone who puts in work to help make this possible, and to everyone who comes in and listens and asks such great questions every session. Thank you for making this possible, and yeah, thank you for coming, and I hope to see you soon. Before we end, I want to make some quick announcements about what's happening with Holistic Bhakti coming up, what there is to look forward to. So in 2 weeks' time, we are having another session on Ayurveda and health with one expert in nutrition called Philip Weeks, who also has had a lot of association with devotees and different people of different spiritual groups. And I've personally seen him, and he's very thorough and he's very passionate about the subject. In 4 weeks' time, we're going to have meditation in action revisited. At the end, Yashodananda Prabhu, you might want to add on something to what I'm saying, but when I'm done, you can do that. So we're going to go back to this topic that we looked at earlier of meditation in action. We've done this alpha test on this beautiful process for chanting, and the alpha test will be finished before 4 weeks' time, and different people who have taken part in this are going to come on and share their experiences, how it helped, or what they learned from the process. So it's going to be a really beautiful session. And we're also very excited to announce a formal spin-off from Holistic Bhakti. We're calling it, although this hasn't been finalized, we're calling it Holistic Bhakti in Action. So these are going to be opportunities for various devotees based on subjects that we might have discussed in Holistic Bhakti to then go deeper into that subject and focus very intensely. We might call it in focus as well. We haven't decided just yet, but in around a month's time, we're going to do this session or these sessions on the subject of Ayurveda, and with Sriman Nimai Chaitanya Prabhu, we are going to be taken through his 8-day cleanse. Now, he usually charges for this. He usually does it. It's his profession, but he's so passionate about the health of devotees that he's agreed that he wants to come and do it for free. And he wants to guide devotees from all around the world on this 8-day cleanse to help improve his health. He told me some of the personal testimonials of people who have done this cleanse, and I was really impressed. Talking about people getting off all medication for allergies and all sorts of different improvements. So you're going to be hearing a lot more about that in the future. And yeah, I think that's everything we have to look forward to that's been scheduled. There's obviously going to be more sessions, but thank you once again everyone for coming along. Yashodananda Prabhu, did you want to add anything
I want to thank you for beautiful emceeing and also being an example for your own generation in that you're taking on more leadership for Holistic Bhakti in a very enthusiastic and very beautiful way. And I can see your combination of creativity and good organization is bearing fruit. So it's beautiful to see, Tarun. Like you're like the moon rising in the sky. Beautiful. Really nice. I'd like to add a couple of quick things. One thing is having last year in was it June, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I tell you one thing, when death really is on your shoulder, time is precious. And what it really does do is it focuses your mind. You have 86,400 seconds in every day, and every second is not to be wasted. And I'm actually quite conscious that having gotten the all clear, although it can come back any moment, I noticed that my consciousness is not quite as sharp as it was when it was under that pressure. So my desire for myself and my desire actually for everybody is that we can become present enough to the imminence of death, because it is imminent actually for all of us. It's in a blink of a second in the day of Brahma. It's like it's either today or tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow. It's very close for all of us. If we can be really present to death, then we can actually be present to life, and we can be present to every precious second that we've been given to be human beings in this age of Lord Chaitanya is extremely glorious and merciful by the mercy of Lord Nityananda. If we can grasp every second like it really matters, then we can become really, really amazing devotees by grace. And I felt Yashashvani really said something very important today, which kind of echoed a lot. Actually, I think everyone said the same thing, but Yashashvani summarized it really nicely about the heart. If you close off your heart to grief, if you close off your heart to emotions, you close off your heart to Krishna, because actually the heart is indivisible. So you cannot close off one part of the heart without closing off the rest of the heart. And I'd like to say to Diva, try meditation in action as a process for dealing with either any grief you're feeling for anyone who's passed or anyone who's about to pass. Meditation action, as prescribed by Srila Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, will help you highlight the anatta after you've dealt with the actual reality of the grief. It can both avoid spiritual bypassing, but give you access to the appropriate anatta. So I think it's getting late. I think it's time to close the program. To thank everybody for their Shravan. Everyone's got two beautiful ears and a heart that's listening, which is, there's no kirtan without Shravan, and there's no Shravan without kirtan. So I'd like to thank all of you beautiful participants from all over the world, and feel free to unmute and have some beautiful association. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Vancha Kalpa, Tarubhyas Cha, Kripa Sindhu Bhaeva Cha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha. Okay, thank you. I want to say everything.